On today's Locked On Giants podcast, the New York Giant rookies are in the house, and here are some storylines for that group that I'm especially interested in seeing unfold in the coming weeks.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you have made us your first listen of the day, an extra thanks to you for doing so. We appreciate you. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when their first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. All right, Giant fans, on today's show, the Giants rookies, they reported to training camp on Tuesday, so the media is not going to be allowed in the building until next week, as I've been telling you this week on the shows. But I'm going to give you a list of storylines, some obvious, some not so obvious, that I'm going to be paying attention to with regards to the rookies, the things that I think are the things we need to pay attention to. Then in segment 2, we're going to take a look at the New York Giants offense's personnel packages. What packages worked well? How often did the Giants use these packages? What were the results? And oh, by the way, how did Russell Wilson do in these packages when he was with the Steelers? So we'll talk about that and also the different personnel and the specific players. That will be segment 2. And then in segment 3, we will take a look at the big question, which is, have the Giants closed the gap with their NFC East foes? If so, what needs to happen? Where could they potentially overcome any challenges from those foes? And what are the keys to victory? And is victory possible? Last year, the Giants couldn't win against the NFC East. This year might be a different story. So anyway, that is our list of topics for today's show. Again, welcome on into everybody. All right, let's get to topic number 1, which is the biggest storylines for the New York Giants rookies. Again, they reported to camp on Tuesday. So everybody had their physicals, everybody got fitted for equipment. They went through a series of meetings, no on-field work on Tuesday. I don't know how much on-field work they're going to be doing between now and next week when the veterans come in, but pretty much it's going to be a lot of meetings, some walkthroughs and stuff like that, from what I understand. And again, the media is not going to be in the building until next Wednesday. I'll be there next Wednesday, starting next Wednesday, with all the updates. But let's take a look at some of the key storylines, the biggest storylines. Now, there's obviously some obvious ones, and there's some that are maybe not as obvious. So we'll start off with, for me, one of the main storylines is the health of the rookies, particularly Darius Alexander and Cam Skattebo. Alexander didn't really practice. I didn't see him practice at all during the spring. So that was a little concerning because, look, he's a guy that I think they are counting on to really be a part of that defensive line. And the fact that he wasn't able to get on the field and do the drills, I mean, not even the simple drills, the individual drills, which sometimes a guy who's a little further along in his rehab is able to do, that was concerning to me. I'm not going to lie. Now, the good news, if there is good news, is that Darius Alexander, we did see him standing on the sideline with the coach while the drills were going on. And I say that's good news because if he was that banged up and if it was a lower body injury, he would not be allowed to stand out there on the hard turf. They would keep him inside and they would have him rehab. So maybe it was an upper body injury. I don't know what it was, but what I do know is that he better be out there for the start of camp. Now, we have not gotten any lists from the Giants regarding anybody who's starting the camp on PUP. So we'll see who passes a physical and who doesn't. That'll tell us kind of where guys are at. Cam Skattebo, I mentioned him. he's another one who he started practicing earlier in the spring and then they backed off of him for some reason or another. Again, I don't know what the injury was. Brian Dable did not go into details with the injuries, but when it comes to rookies, they can ill afford to not be on the field, especially in those early days when the coaching is able to really focus on technique work, the ins and outs of the offense, getting into the huddle, getting out of the huddle, all that stuff. And, it's interesting because some guys will say, well, I've been playing football all my life. So, how hard is it? Yeah, but when you get to the NFL level, sometimes the coaches want you to do things a little differently. So it is kind of important that you're out there. Don't say, oh, it's not a big deal because I've been playing football for X number of years. So that's probably number one on my list of storylines. Now, obviously, number two is going to be Jackson Dart and his progression throughout the summer. Now, again, I think with Jackson Dart, he will start off as quarterback 3. Will he be able to surpass Jameis Winston as quarterback 2? I don't think that will happen right away. I think down the line, we will see that happen. There are things that Jackson Dart needs to work on, needs to show that he is advanced or progressed in. And they include going through his progressions, going to his second and third reads, something he really didn't do a whole lot of at Ole Miss, right? And then avoiding, sacks. Sometimes you have to take a sack, but, there are times when you can run yourself out of the sack and buy time. And these were some of the areas that Jackson Dart in the spring had trouble with. So, just a few. Now, some other things I'm sure they're going to work with him on include his footwork, his throwing motion. You don't want to tinker too much with the mechanics unless there's something blatantly wrong. And I don't think there was, but, there might be some things that they can do to maybe tighten things up, if you will, as far as the mechanics go. So I do expect Brian Dable, the head coach, is going to be pinned to Jackson Dart's side as he was in the springtime. And I also expect the Giants coaches are going to throw everything at Jackson Dart. He's going to see disguised coverages. He's going to see blitzes. He's going to see everything because Brian Dable, he likes to be spontaneous when it comes to the quarterbacks, especially when he's developing a quarterback. We kind of learned that when we saw Hard Knocks and Dable would be, drilling quarterbacks on the whiteboard. And then, a few minutes after going through a play, he'll be like, oh, that play I told you before, run it back to me to see if the guy was really paying attention. So I expect Dable to really test Jackson Dart, see how he reacts to, the unexpected. Because look, hey, when you play quarterback, nothing really goes according to plan. So you have to be able to adjust. You have to be able to, deliver on whatever the circumstances call for. So that's going to be a big storyline for him. Okay. Abdul Carter is also going to be of high interest this summer. Now, Abdul Carter, I've been absolutely raving about him. His quick first step, his tenacity, his business-like approach. Love all that about him. But something Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, said back, I think it was last month at the mandatory minicamp, he was talking about how with Abdul Carter, he has to, quote unquote, learn how to become an outside linebacker at this level. Remember, Carter only played outside linebacker predominantly last year, his final year at Penn State. So there are things that, he needs to work on that they want to see improve. Now, a couple things that might come up in the course of his tutelage, if you will, his pass rush plan, particularly against guys who are stronger and longer against him. How is he going to disengage? So that's going to be something that I think they're going to want to see. And with that, his hand punch, right? When opponents get their hands on him, how is he able to fight them off and not let them knock him off of his, intended path? That was a kind of a knock against him coming out of Penn State. Not a whole lot of knocks against Abdul Carter, who's going to be a good one, folks, but still some things that they want to work on with him to get him, ready for week one. So those are just a few things that are going to come up. Now, will they use Abdul Carter as an inside linebacker, maybe down on the line of scrimmage with his hand in the dirt. Possibly. I think we might see some of that later on as the camp progresses. Abdul Carter is a quick learner, so I fully expect that by the time training camp is over, Abdul Carter will have a nice array of packages and pass rush moves and counter attacks that he will be able to unleash on opposing offensive linemen. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about for the rookies is the bottom of the depth chart at receiver. It is loaded, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I bring this up because, look, we all talk about Jalen Hyatt and the spring that he had, and he had a pretty good spring, no question about it. But here's the thing. When you start getting into receiver 4 and onward, you better either be good at what you're doing or you better be able to contribute on special teams. Well, Jalen Hyatt doesn't really get them much on special teams. Now, chances are he will lock down wide receiver number 4. But there's a bunch of young receivers that are competing for roster spots, like, 6 and 7, spots 6 and 7. And I've skipped 5 because I believe Amir Smith-Marset will be wide receiver 5, who gives some obviously something on special teams. So who amongst Bo Collins, Dalen Cambry, Daquan Felton, Juice Wells, who amongst that group is going to step up? I'd be kind of surprised at this point if one of them didn't crack the 53-man roster. I don't know who it's going to be. We're going to see who separates themselves during the summer. But I mention that because, again, if Jalen Hyatt turns out to be one of these guys who's a great practice player, but doesn't really, transfer that over to the game, that could be a problem for him. I mean, I'm optimistic about Jalen Hyatt. I think he'll get it done. But I thought the same thing last year and kind of the year before, and it didn't happen. So make a believer out of me. That's what it boils down to. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at the Giants' offensive personnel packages from last year. What did they run? What was their production in each one? And what might they need to see more of? What might they need to see less of? Their numbers were kind of surprising. I'm going to go through them with you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and it makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if their first bet wins. So go on, open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up tomorrow, the Locked On Top 100 Players drops at 10 a.m. Eastern. I'm going to have a reaction show. And oh boy, do I have a lot to say about where some of the Giant players placed. I mean, there were some stunners across the board in this top 100. The top 100 being voted on, by the way, by the Locked On NFL hosts. But the Giant players, where they placed, who placed, whew, get ready, because I think I'm gonna have a rant or two in tomorrow's show. So those of you who are always saying, hey, I love it when you get animated, you might see me get a little animated tomorrow. So anyway, that is tomorrow's show. And again, the Locked On Top 100 drops at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow on Locked On Today. So make sure you check that out. All right, let's get back to today's show. All right, we're going to take a look at the Giants' offensive personnel packages from last year. Now, what I did was I looked at what the Giants ran and what their success rate was in terms of their numbers and production. And then I took a look at what Russell Wilson ran in Pittsburgh. Now, before I get into the actual numbers, a disclaimer. I realized the personnel was different in Pittsburgh versus the Giants. But here's the thing. The Giants are pretty much running it back with the same offensive skill position players. And so kind of looking what Russell Wilson did with Pittsburgh gives us an idea of what he might be able to do with the Giants with the same personnel that the quarterbacks last year had to work with. So that was kind of my thinking. Let's get into it. All right. Now, the Giants predominantly, as you can imagine, they use 11 personnel, which is one running back, one tight end, three receivers. That was their most frequently used package, using that 72.62%. This all, by the way, per True Media. They did use 12 personnel, but not as much. I was actually a little surprised to see that this number wasn't as high. I suspect maybe it had something to do with Theo Johnson being injured, but the Giants used 12 personnel, which is one running back, two tight ends, 16.46% of the time. And then their third most frequently used package, believe it or not, was 13 personnel, one back, three tight ends. They only used that 2.63% of the time. All right. So that's, we're not even going to talk about 13 personnel because they just didn't use three tight ends all that often. And when they did, it was more or less when they needed short yardage or they were down by the goal line. All right. How did they do with 11 personnel in the passing game? All right. This is specific to the passing game, by the way. So in 11 personnel, they completed 122 passes out of 182 attempts for a 67% completion percentage, 1,092 yards, 5.8 yards per attempt. They had 14 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and 42. It looks like they had 42 sacks. So 11 personnel. It was their most frequently used package, but not as productive as 12 personnel. 12 personnel, they only ran that 79 times for the passing game. Okay, this is just for the passing game. I didn't do run. So for the passing game, they completed 54 of 79 passes, 68.4% of the completion rate, 563 yards, 7.4 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and only 4 sacks. Now, this is kind of interesting because I often wondered why they didn't take more advantage of 12 personnel in the passing game, particularly targeting the tight ends. I suspect Malik Neighbors had a big, hand in that. But still, the tight ends, as I'll get to in a moment, they weren't too bad. I mean, they were pretty productive, which I'll get to in a moment. But let me first look at what Russell Wilson did with Pittsburgh in those personnel packages, 11 and 12. All right, so in 11 personnel, Russell Wilson, per True Media, 141 out of 223, which is a 63.2% completion rate, 1,645 yards, 7.4 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He took 23 sacks. 12 personnel, 44 of 74 for 50, which is about 59.5% completion rate, 572 yards, 7.7 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, only 5 sacks. Folks, I really, really want to see the Giants use a little bit more 12 personnel and target the tight ends in the passing game this year. I get it. Malik Neighbors is the number one guy. He's the guy you want to get whose hands you want to get the ball into. But I don't think you can forget about the tight ends. I just felt like they were underused last year. And to that point, let's take a look at what they contributed. All right. Theo Johnson, 11.4 yards per reception, which was slightly better than Malik Neighbors, who had 11 yards per reception. All right. Now, I think if Theo Johnson had played out the entire string and not had his season cut short, would he have been ahead of Neighbors? Maybe yes, maybe no. Daniel Bellinger, let's talk about him. Guys kind of disappeared from the passing game. I mean, he had that great rookie season. Then last year, or 2 years ago, I should say, they had brought in Darren Waller. and Bellinger kind of disappeared. Last year, disappeared again because of Theo Johnson. But Daniel Bellinger, 14 of 14 reception rate, 100%. Theo Johnson, on the other hand, caught 67.4% of his passes that were thrown to him. So, again, I'm not saying the Giants should abandon the receivers. But what I am saying is, how about a little bit more of a mix in that passing game? Get the ball to the tight ends. Now, going back to Bellinger just real quick, I think a problem with him was there was some concern about his athleticism, that maybe he couldn't get the yards after the catch. Try it. I mean, maybe he's gotten better at it. What do you have to lose? You can try it certainly in the preseason. See if he can maybe pick up some more yards against the catch, if that's your concern. Theo Johnson, you look at him, last year they threw everything at that kid, and he handled what was thrown at him with aplomb. But, once he really got comfortable just before his injury, that's when he really started to take off, and you thought to yourself, wow, they might have something here. So they've got tight ends with good size. Theo Johnson, he's a big-bodied man, should be able to block out defenders. And especially, I'd like to see them use these tight ends in the red zone where they can create matchup nightmares for the opposing team. All right. To me, it's almost like the tight end has been an afterthought for Brian Daboll in this offense. And, Malik Neighbors, yes, I understand that. Darius Slayton, look, I've always said he's underrated. You want to get the ball to him a few times during the course of the game, but Wan'Dale Robinson, for him to have as many pass targets as he had last year, maybe some of those go to the tight end. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they plan to distribute it, or if they even have a plan. They probably are just going to roll with it how a game goes. But I would like to see the tight ends more involved. I think 12 personnel can work just as well for the Giants offense. And especially, now that they supposedly have better quarterback play. So we'll see if Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, who I believe is going to call the plays, by the way, this year, we'll see if they agree, if they get the tight ends more involved. But that's something that I felt was missing last year in the passing game. And I wonder if they had gotten the tight ends more involved, would that have mattered in terms of how the passing production actually was? It might have made a small dent. It might have made a big dent. We'll never know, will we? All right. Coming up next, the NFC East. How have the Giants done as far as closing the gap? And moreover, can they actually win against their NFC East opponents? Or are they destined for another winless season against division opponents? We'll talk about that right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And again, tomorrow we are going to have reactions to the Locked On NFL Top 100 players. Trust me, this one's going to be heated. I am not happy with some of the spots that some of the Giant players landed. I mean, I couldn't believe it in just, looking at how it laid out. But I don't want to give it away. I want you to tune in tomorrow. The top 100 NFL players drops tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. I will have a reaction show, although you'll probably be able to guess what my reaction is going to be if you tune into that show and see where the Giant players placed. So that being said, let's get into the final segment of today's show, which is the NFC East versus the Giants. Now, did the Giants close the gap with their NFC East foes? Who, of course, let's not forget, while the Giants were getting better, the NFC East foes were also getting better. And what are the Giants' chances of maybe winning a game or two against their NFC East foes? All right, we'll start with the Eagles. The Eagles, as much as I hate to say it, folks, I don't think the Giants are close to the Eagles right now. I really don't. The Eagles, they had a top 10 offense last year, the second-ranked rushing offense. if the Giants are going to have any chance whatsoever of keeping it close against the Eagles, that run defense better be a lot more improved than it has been in the last few years. All right. Saquon Barkley's coming off a career year, all right, which hurt all Giant fans, I'm sure. So the Giants went out and they really tried to bolster their run defense. Now, if they can somehow manage to bottle up that Philadelphia rushing attack, maybe, just maybe the games will be a little closer. But I don't know. I still think, again, as much as I hate to say it, the Eagles are the cream of the crop in the division. They're the defending Super Bowl champion until further notice. They're the defending NFC East champion. All right. So they are the number one team in the division. All right. They're the ones with the target on their back. So we will see if the Giants close the gap. I don't think they're quite there yet. I don't know if they're, I can't really say that they're close. I wouldn't say they're close, but yeah, I'm curious to see how it plays out, but I would like to think for the Giants, a moral victory. And I know there's no like medals for trying, as Bill Parcells' book title one said, but what I would like to maybe see is some closer games between the two this year. So even if the Eagles sweep the Giants, which I do think is a possibility, let's see some closer games, instead of the blowouts that we have come to see when these two teams meet. All right. So that would kind of, I think, be a step in the right direction. That would tell us that the Giants are a little bit closer in terms of their personnel being able to match up against the Eagles personnel. All right. Let's talk about Washington now. Washington was a surprise team last year, went all the way to the NFC Championship game, lost to the Eagles, as we all know. Jaden Daniels, their quarterback, was something else. I mean, he was really good. But you know what, folks? The Giants played the Commanders pretty close in the two games that they lost last year. Both of those games were decided by less than one score. All right. So you had this first game, I think, was 3 points. The second one was 5 points, right? That's not too bad. And you think about that first game, if the Giants have a healthy kicker, maybe they win that game. So let's take a look at Washington. Washington's offense last year, 7th overall, they had the 3rd best rushing offense, all right, behind the Eagles. They also had the 17th ranked passing offense. Washington, interestingly enough, is 6-4 in September since 2022. And I mention that because the Giants see them in week 1. So Washington typically has come out of the gate quickly. Now, what needs to happen for the Giants to maybe have a chance in this game? Quite simply, that pass rush better be fully functioning when they come out of training camp, right? No, we're extending the preseason, or week 1 is an extension of the preseason. I don't want to hear that. I do not want to hear anybody with the Giants say, we're still, in preseason mode. Sorry, week 1, starting in week 1, that game starts counting. So don't tell me, we're in preseason mode when the games don't count. And now, you're using that as an excuse. So anyway, I want to see that pass rush come out firing. Jaden Daniels is not bad under pressure. Last year, he had a 49% completion rate. He attempted 7.2 yards per attempt. He had 10 touchdowns and 5 interceptions when under pressure. And here's the weird thing. He averaged 3.93 seconds to throw. That's kind of a lot. That just goes to show you that Jaden Daniels was able to maybe move around in the pocket and avoid trouble. So, if you're the Giants, you want to throw everything you've got at this kid to cut down on the amount of time he has to throw, to force him into some errant throws. And that's where maybe we'll see some of these, multi-pass rusher packages that I think Shane Bowen is cooking up. So, do I think the Giants are closer to Washington? Yeah, I do. I really do. I think that front 7 is going to be the difference for the Giants in getting to Jaden Daniels. Now, again, if they can force some errant throws, maybe we have different results this year. Maybe Jaden Daniels hits a sophomore slump. I know, wishful thinking, but hey, that's why you line up and you play the game. All right, Cowboys. How about them Cowboys, right? Dallas ranked 11th in passing offense last year, but overall, they had the 17th ranked offense and they were 27th against the run. So I went and I looked up Dak Prescott's stats in passing, right? And in particular, what I wanted to do is I set an earmark or a average pass attempts per game league wide, which came out to 35. All right. This again per True Media. Dallas last year averaged 37.5 pass attempts per game. Prescott was 26 and 28 in games when he attempted 35 or more pass attempts. All right. And that's over his career, by the way. Now, versus the Giants, the two losses that he had, Dak Prescott attempted 45 passes and 37 passes. Okay, so there might be something there with pass attempts. So what does that tell us? A couple things. Number one, for the Giants, time of possession is going to be key, but more importantly, stop the run. Stop the run. Don't give Dallas the option of, oh, you know what? We've got third and manageable, so we could run it or we could pass it. Because Dak Prescott, right now, you would say that their passing game is a lot better than their running game. Their running game is still to be determined. So if you're playing the numbers, that's what kind of favors you in that regard. And, the other thing, like I said, is just keeping him off the field. Dak Prescott, just about every game that he has won against the Giants, the Cowboys have dominated the time of possession. So that goes without saying. Keep the offense off the field. Maybe you give yourself a chance, and then maybe these passing numbers don't even matter. So a lot of work for the Giants still to do. We'll see how the rosters shape up because right now, again, everybody's in there has a 90-man roster. They've got to whittle it down, see how injuries factor in, what surprises come about, what free agent pickups they're going to make once all the roster cuts are done. So there's still a lot of work to be done across the board, across the NFC East, across the NFL. We'll bring it all to you, obviously, as it unfolds. All right. Giant fans, before we say goodbye, I've been talking about it all show long, but a reminder, the Locked On NFL Top 100 will be released on Wednesday, July 16th, 10 a.m. Eastern on Locked On Sports Today. The NFL Top 100 was voted on by the NFL hosts of Locked On. And as I said, there are some stunners, especially for the Giants. So don't miss this special event. Subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And then don't forget to check out the Locked On Giants podcast because I've got a few things to say about how this voting went. And I'm going to try and keep it cool. But anyway, check out Locked On Giants tomorrow and all week long. I'll have shows for you all week long as we head on into training camp. Giant fans, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you made us your first listen of the day, thank you for that. I'll see you tomorrow with an all-new episode.